You know, in the late 1800s and early 1900s, something incredible happened. A massive wave of humanity. Millions of people set out from Eastern Europe for America. They were trading literally everything they'd ever known for a single powerful idea. But here's the thing. What happens when a dream that big smacks right into reality?
And that's the real heart of their story right there. On one hand, you've got this beautiful dream of America, this place where anything is possible, where you can be free. But on the other hand, the reality was just a brutal, daily fight for survival. The entire experience of these immigrants lived in that huge gap between the dream and the reality.
I mean, it really makes you stop and think, what could possibly make someone leave their home, their family, their entire world behind? For so many, this wasn't really a story about choice. It was a story about necessity. It was a dangerous dream, for sure, but it was born from circumstances that were even more dangerous.
So this is what they were up against. Life in Eastern Europe was just a constant struggle. We're talking about crushing poverty, where you didn't know where your next meal was coming from. The threat of war was always hanging over your head. And for many, especially Jewish communities, there was terrifying religious persecution. On top of all that, there was just no way to get ahead. No land, no jobs. Leaving wasn't just a good idea. For a lot of people, it was the only idea left.
It's just incredible when you think about the courage that took. They basically packed their whole lives into a single bag, got on these insanely crowded ships, and sailed off into the complete unknown. The most valuable thing they owned wasn't something they could pack, was it? It was that powerful dream they were carrying with them.
Okay, so after weeks packed onto a ship, can you just imagine seeing the Statue of Liberty for the first time? It must have been absolutely mind-blowing. But here's the catch. Arriving didn't mean you were in. Not yet. First, you had to face the true gates of America and the terrifying trial of Ellis Island.
Just try to put yourself in their shoes. You're exhausted, you probably don't speak a word of English, and they immediately shove you into this intimidating inspection line. First, doctors are looking you over for any sign of sickness that could get you sent right back. Then, officials are firing questions at you, trying to decide if you're desirable. And it all came down to that final moment, the verdict that would decide your entire future. Either you're in, and your new life begins, or you're deported right back to the nightmare you just fled. So yeah, for these new arrivals, their very first moments in America were this crazy mix of feelings. On one hand, there was this huge, unbelievable hope that you finally made it. But it was always shadowed by this deep anxiety that any second, someone could just take it all away.
All right, so for everyone who made it through Ellis Island, the next trial started immediately. You had to work to survive. And the America they stepped into was this industrial beast, and it was starving for cheap labor. This became their crucible, where they were forged by fire and steel. So they poured into the engine rooms of the nation. We're talking about working in the blistering heat of steel mills, the deafening roar of textile factories. They were the ones laying the railroad tracks that stretched across the country, and they were the ones going down into the dark, dangerous mines. And these jobs weren't just hard, they were absolutely backbreaking. And a lot of the time, they were deadly.
12-hour shifts. Let that sink in. And that wasn't a rare thing, that was the norm. Often 6 days a week, forget about weekends or days off. Life became this relentless cycle of work, sleep, and pretty much nothing else. Being tough wasn't a personality trait, it was just how you survived.
And, to add insult to injury, on top of those brutal conditions, they were getting paid less for it. An immigrant worker in a steel mill might make $1.50 for a 12-hour day. A native-born worker doing the same job, he could make over $2. So they were literally building the country, but they were definitely not getting an equal slice of the pie.
So with all of this stacked against them, how in the world did they keep going? How did they not just give up? Well, they found strength, but not by trying to disappear into America. They found it by holding on tight to who they were. Their culture became their shield, their anchor in the middle of this crazy storm. And make no mistake, they were not exactly welcomed with open arms. They faced constant prejudice. In the tenements they lived in, on the factory floors, they were called foreigners, treated as undesirable. They had to prove themselves over and over again every single day, in a society that was often just plain hostile to them.
So, what did they do? They turned to each other. They built these powerful communities from the ground up. Their churches and synagogues became way more than just places to pray. They were community centers, they were lifelines. They started organizations to help new folks find a place to live, find a job. They kept their traditions alive with festivals, and they fought like hell to make sure their kids could still speak their native language. This is how they kept their identity from being erased. So what did all that struggle, all that resilience, actually lead to?
Well, their story doesn't just end with hardship. It ends with them building this incredible, unseen foundation for the America that we all live in today.
And you have to understand, this wasn't an overnight success story. It took generations. The first generation, their job was just to survive. To do that back-breaking labor, they sacrificed everything so that their kids, the second generation, could get an education and start to find their place. And then, by the time you get to the third generation, those families weren't just surviving anymore. They were thriving and contributing to every part of American life.
And that's the bottom line, really. The contribution these immigrants made was just immense. Their names might not be carved on any monuments, but you can see their labor in the skylines of our cities and feel it in the steel that holds up our industries. They weren't just building a life for their own families, they were building modern America.
When it comes right down to it, the story of these ordinary, unbelievably courageous people is the story of America. It's a story of struggle, yeah, but it's also a story of sacrifice and incredible resilience. So I'll just leave you with this question. When you look around today, what parts of their legacy, that hard work, those tight-knit family bonds, that enduring culture, do you still see all around you?